How does a whole civilization, with advanced cities, trade, and art, just vanish overnight? Imagine a world where streets were perfectly aligned, where every home had running water, and where peace, not war, was the foundation of daily life. This isn't a vision of the future. It's a glimpse into the past, nearly 5,000 years ago, in the heart of the Indus Valley. But then, something happened. The cities fell silent, the people disappeared, and history forgot their name. Was it a flood, a drought, or something far stranger? No one knows exactly why, but clues still whisper through the ruins. In this video, we'll uncover the rise, brilliance, and sudden fall of one of humanity's greatest mysteries, the Indus Valley Civilization. Stay till the end, because what they left behind might change how you see the ancient world. Welcome to the mystery that time erased. Before we talk about the greatness of the Indus Valley, we must step back to a time when it was not yet a civilization, but a vast stretch of fertile land, silent, waiting, full of promise. Thousands of years ago, long before the pyramids of Egypt or the palaces of Mesopotamia, the plains along the Indus River were already alive with rhythm, the rhythm of water, wind, and soil. This region, which today lies across modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, was one of the most hospitable environments on Earth. Fed by the mighty Indus River and its tributaries, the Ravi, Beas, Sutlej, Chenab, and Jhelum, the land was rich, green, and generous. Every year the rivers overflowed, depositing fine silt and minerals that turned the plains into a paradise for early farmers. Life began simply. Small groups of settlers made their homes along the riverbanks, learning the secrets of the soil. They sowed barley and wheat, tamed cattle, and built small mud brick houses to shelter from the desert winds. These weren't yet cities, just humble beginnings, scattered villages surrounded by endless plains. But within these simple lives, a quiet revolution was already underway, because here, in the heart of the Indus Valley, humanity was learning to live not just from the land, but with it. The story of the Indus Valley begins around 3300 BCE, in what historians call the early Harappan period. At this time, other ancient cultures were rising elsewhere. The Sumerians were mastering writing in Mesopotamia, and Egyptians were laying the foundations of their first great kingdoms. But in South Asia, something different was happening. Instead of grand monuments or conquering armies, the people here focused on harmony, on building communities that could survive together, grow together, and adapt to the forces of nature. The river was their lifeline. It gave them water, crops, and fertile ground. And it also gave them something far greater, connection. Along its long, winding course, people began to trade. Grain moved downstream. Pottery and tools changed hands. Ideas flowed with the current. Bit by bit, these scattered villages began to form networks, early signs of a civilization quietly taking shape. Archaeologists have found traces of these early settlements, small farming towns like Mehrgarh, one of the oldest known agricultural sites in South Asia. There, even before 3000 BCE, people cultivated wheat and barley, domesticated animals, and created some of the first pottery and ornaments in the region. The people of Mehrgarh learned to use copper tools, build mud brick homes, and bury their dead with care and ritual. It was in many ways the seed from which the entire Indus civilization would grow. As generations passed, the rhythm of life along the Indus became more complex. The farmers began to produce more than they needed, creating surplus crops that could be stored, traded, and used to support other professions. When food becomes abundant, society transforms. Not everyone needs to farm anymore. Some become potters, craftsmen, builders, or traders. Others become organizers, the first planners perhaps, who started imagining how villages could be arranged, how streets could be aligned, how drainage could flow. This is where the genius of the Indus Valley began to emerge, not through kings or wars, but through planning, balance, and order. Villages expanded into towns. Towns grew into cities. And somewhere around 2600 BCE, the Indus Valley entered what we now call its mature phase, a time when cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, and Dholavira rose from the earth like a miracle of human design. But before that golden age, during the centuries of quiet growth, the foundations were being laid, not just in architecture, but in mindset. The people of this land understood nature deeply. They respected the cycles of monsoon and drought, flood and flow. They observed how the river changed course and how the land responded. Their entire way of life was an act of adaptation, and in that understanding, they created one of the most sustainable systems in ancient history. Unlike many ancient peoples who fought over territory, the early settlers of the Indus Valley seemed to prefer stability. Archaeologists have found almost no evidence of warfare, no massive weapons caches, no defensive walls in the early sites. Instead, they found standardization, a sign that people across vast regions were cooperating under shared systems. The bricks used in construction, for example, had nearly identical proportions, a ratio of 1.24, whether found in Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, hundreds of kilometers apart. Even at the earliest stages, these builders followed a sense of precision and order rarely seen in the ancient world. This was not coincidence. It was coordination. It meant communication. It meant vision, and that vision was rooted in the land itself. The Indus River was unpredictable, flooding one year, drying the next. So the people learned to adapt. They developed early irrigation methods and clever ways to manage water. They stored grain in large communal granaries. They built homes on elevated platforms to protect against floods. They understood that survival depended not on dominance, but on balance. As their society matured, trade became its lifeblood. The river system connected them not just with nearby communities, but with distant civilizations. Artifacts from the Indus Valley, beads, pottery, seals have been found as far away as Mesopotamia, suggesting an international trade network thousands of years old. But this trade didn't begin suddenly in the great cities. It started here in the early villages, where people first realized that their crafts could travel farther than their feet. Copper tools from the Baluchistan hills, shells from the Arabian Sea, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan all moved through these early routes. Slowly, a web of commerce and culture began to weave across the region. This is what made the Indus Valley different. It wasn't a civilization built on conquest, it was built on connection. By 2500 BCE, the signs of a unified culture were undeniable. Across hundreds of kilometers, people shared the same pottery styles, the same weights and measures, even the same symbols carved into small stone seals, marks that many believe were part of an early writing system. Though this script remains undeciphered, its presence even in the earliest layers suggests that communication and record-keeping were already valued. And yet, despite all this progress, the Indus people left no grand monuments, no colossal statues, no tales of kings or gods etched in stone. Instead, they left patterns, in bricks, in streets, in artifacts, that spoke of everyday life. A civilization not obsessed with rulers, but with order and harmony. The quiet power of that simplicity is what makes the Indus Valley so extraordinary. Archaeological evidence suggests that even before the rise of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, people here understood advanced urban concepts, drainage channels, granaries, and standardized housing. These were not random developments. They were part of a long evolution, a story of learning, trial, and refinement over centuries. One can imagine a small village along the river, where elders debated how to redirect floodwater or where to store grain for the coming dry season. Those small decisions, repeated generation after generation, became the blueprint for one of the most advanced city systems in the ancient world, and it all began here, before the rise. There's a quiet poetry in how the Indus people approached life. They didn't carve their names in stone. They left patterns in clay. They didn't build pyramids for kings. They built streets for citizens. They didn't conquer. They collaborated. Before their civilization reached its height, their greatest achievement was not their architecture, but their understanding of balance between human need and natural rhythm. They didn't try to dominate the land. They shaped themselves around it, and that harmony, rare even in modern times, became the secret foundation of their success. Every discovery, every shard of pottery, every bead, every buried wall, tells the same story, a people who believed in precision, beauty and peace, a civilization born not from chaos but from patience. And while history often celebrates warriors and empires, the Indus Valley reminds us of a different kind of strength, the strength to build quietly, steadily, without destroying what sustains you. Before we move to the age of great cities and mysteries, pause for a moment and picture the valley as it once was, a green horizon stretching endlessly under the sun, with the Indus River glimmering like silver in the distance. Villages hum softly with the sound of grain being ground, of water flowing through channels, of children laughing near mud brick homes. No palaces, no armies, just people living, growing, creating, unaware that one day their world would rise higher than they could ever imagine and vanish just as silently. Before we talk about the dissap, large pool built of waterproof bricks, surrounded by small rooms and steps leading down into the water. Historians believe it may have been used for ritual cleansing, but beyond its purpose, it represents something deeper, a culture that valued cleanliness, order, and community. From the air, if one could imagine flying above Mohenjo-Daro, the city would look astonishingly modern. Rectangular blocks, straight avenues, designated zones for homes, markets, and public buildings. There was a citadel, a raised area where the main public structures stood, and a lower town where people lived and worked. But unlike other ancient cities, there is little sign of hierarchy. There are no palaces or grand tombs. The houses, though varying in size, share the same quality of design and materials. It's as if the city itself was built for everyone, not for kings or gods, but for people. That's one of the most striking aspects of the Indus Valley, its apparent egalitarian spirit. While Egypt and Mesopotamia celebrated divine rulers and towering monuments, the Indus people seemed to believe in collective progress, not individual glory. Their cities were their monuments, functional, clean, and alive, and yet these cities were not isolated. They were deeply connected, through trade, through craftsmanship, through shared symbols and ideas. Evidence of a vast trade network links the Indus Valley to distant lands. Artifacts found in Mesopotamia, such as carnelian beads, shells, and etched seals, match those from Indus sites. Clay tablets from Mesopotamian cities mention a mysterious place called Meluha, which many scholars believe refers to the Indus region. Ships likely sailed from Lothal, a port city near the Arabian Sea, carrying goods across the Persian Gulf. Lothal even had a dockyard, one of the oldest known in the world, where boats could be loaded and unloaded safely, protected from tides. What did they trade? Precious stones, metals, cotton textiles, spices, and handcrafted jewelry. In return, they received silver, tin, and other materials from the West. Trade wasn't just economic, it was cultural. It connected the Indus people with distant civilizations, long before the idea of global commerce existed. But the true soul of the Indus Valley lay in its crafts and art. Everywhere archaeologists dig, they find traces of beauty, small terracotta figurines, delicately carved beads, polished ornaments, and intricate seals made from steatite. These seals, usually square or rectangular, often depict animals, bulls, elephants, tigers, unicorns, along with short lines of mysterious symbols. No one has been able to decipher this script yet. Despite decades of study, the meaning of these symbols remains locked away, hidden behind time. Each seal could represent a name, a profession, a trademark, or a prayer. We simply don't know. But the consistency of the script across thousands of miles suggests that it was a real writing system, not mere decoration. What's fascinating is that these seals were not just tools of trade. They were also expressions of identity. They tell us that the people of the Indus Valley valued communication, symbolism, and perhaps even spirituality. Jewelry from the Indus cities reveals a culture of refinement. Gold, silver, and semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise were crafted into necklaces, bracelets, and earrings. Beadmaking was an art form in itself, with specialized workshops producing thousands of uniform beads from stone, shell, and glass. The level of craftsmanship suggests both technical knowledge and aesthetic taste. Each piece was carefully polished, drilled with tiny holes using bow drills, and strung together in intricate patterns. Many of these ornaments were found in graves, suggesting that beauty had a spiritual or social meaning, perhaps connected to status, identity, or the afterlife. But even with such artistry, the people of the Indus Valley remained practical. Their cities were built not for worship or conquest, but for living well. When you walk through the ruins of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro today, you don't see grand statues of rulers or inscriptions celebrating kings. You see streets, clean, straight, efficient. You see wells and drains, granaries and workshops. You see a civilization that cared more about function than fame. That's perhaps the most haunting thing about the Indus Valley, its quietness. Archaeologists have found no evidence of large-scale wars, no fortresses filled with weapons, no records of invasions, no massive armies. The walls they built were for protection against floods, not for defending against enemies. The entire civilization seems to have thrived in peace, a kind of harmony rarely seen in ancient history. That doesn't mean there were no conflicts at all, but rather that the people valued stability over domination. It's as if their power came not from fear, but from cooperation. The cities were also centers of innovation. Standardized weights and measures were used for trade. Small cubes made of chert stone, carefully cut to specific ratios. Across different sites, these weights match perfectly, suggesting a shared system of commerce and fairness. Their pottery was both functional and artistic, painted with geometric designs, symbols, and sometimes animals. Their tools, made of copper and bronze, reveal advanced metalworking. They wove cotton fabrics, possibly the first civilization to do so on a large scale. In every corner you find signs of intelligence, not just technological but social. It takes more than tools to build cities like this. It takes organization, cooperation, and shared values. It takes governance, though what form that took remains one of the great mysteries. Some scholars suggest that the Indus civilization may have been governed by councils or local assemblies rather than kings. There is no evidence of palaces or royal tombs, no crowns or scepters. Perhaps their power lay in collective decision-making, a society run by civic order rather than monarchy. If true, that would make the Indus Valley not only one of the most advanced civilizations of its time, but also one of the most democratic in spirit. The silence of the Indus script hides much. We don't know their names, their leaders, or even their language. But what we do know, from the cities they built and the objects they left behind, tells us enough to understand their brilliance. While other civilizations built upward, chasing gods and glory, the Indus people built outward, designing spaces where everyone had access to life's essentials. They understood that a city was not just walls and streets. It was a living organism, and for centuries that organism thrived, quietly, efficiently, beautifully. Their cities were clean. Their trade was flourishing. Their art was refined. Their people lived in order and peace. From the mountains of Baluchistan to the coast of Gujarat, the hum of civilization echoed. Before the end came, before silence fell, this land was alive with craftsmanship, with trade, with life, a world ahead of its time, and yet destined to disappear. Before we talk about the ruins, the silence and the mystery that still haunts the Indus Valley, we must ask one question, the question that has puzzled historians for over a century. What happened to them? How does a civilization so advanced, so organized, so peaceful, simply vanish? No trace of war. No record of fire or conquest. Just stillness. Streets once filled with merchants and craftsmen now lie buried beneath dust. Wells that once echoed with voices have long gone dry. The Indus Valley didn't end with a single event. No great war, no sudden fall of an empire. Instead, its disappearance was quiet, gradual, and yet, in historical time, strangely abrupt. As if someone had slowly turned down the rhythm of life until the entire civilization faded into silence. Archaeologists call this period the late Harappan phase, roughly between 1900 and 1300 BCE. The once thriving cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, Dholavira, began to decline. The great urban systems that had stood for centuries started to crumble. Streets were no longer cleaned. Drains were left clogged. Bricks were reused to build smaller, rougher homes. Something had changed. But what? Many theories have been proposed, each offering a piece of the puzzle, none providing the full picture. One theory points to climate change, not the modern kind, but ancient shifts that altered the fate of entire regions. The Indus Valley depended on the rhythm of the monsoon, the seasonal rains that nourished their crops and filled their rivers. But evidence suggests that, around 2000 BCE, the monsoons began to weaken. Year after year the rains came later, lighter, or not at all. What was once a lush green plain began to dry. Crops failed. Rivers shrank. The land that had sustained millions slowly turned against them. Sediment studies and satellite imagery show that vast stretches of the Indus Basin experienced prolonged droughts during this period. Without water, agriculture, the heart of their economy, began to collapse. The people tried to adapt. They moved closer to the remaining water sources. They shifted from large cities to smaller villages. But nature was relentless. The drought wasn't a single season. It lasted for centuries, and a civilization built in harmony with nature found itself at the mercy of nature's change. Another theory speaks of the shifting of rivers, especially the mysterious disappearance of the Saraswati River, often mentioned in ancient Indian texts. Some scientists believe that what is now the dry Ghaggar-Hakra riverbed was once a mighty river, possibly part of the same network that fed the Indus cities. Over time, tectonic movements and geological shifts may have altered its course, diverting water away and turning fertile lands into barren plains. Imagine living in a city that relied on a river for everything. Drink. Drain. Each street reflected a mindset that valued balance and order. These people didn't just build to survive, they built to last. The most remarkable part of their legacy lies in their innovations, systems so refined that modern engineers still marvel at them. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro had drainage networks running beneath their streets, built with sloped bricks to carry wastewater away efficiently. Each home had private bathing areas and access to clean water, connected to a citywide sanitation grid. This was more than architecture. It was foresight. At a time when many civilizations struggled with basic hygiene, the people of the Indus Valley had already understood the connection between cleanliness and health. Before we talk about modern sanitation, we should recognize that these ancient people were its earliest pioneers. Their urban design reveals a philosophy that order in the environment nurtures order in the soul. It wasn't about luxury. It was about dignity. Every citizen, regardless of wealth or status, benefited from the same water system and the same waste management. It was equality, expressed not in politics, but in plumbing. Then there were their weights and measures, small, beautifully carved cubes of chert stone found in uniform ratios across different Indus sites. From the farthest trade outposts to the heart of the cities, the same standard was used. No kings demanded it, no armies enforced it, yet everyone followed it. That kind of unity doesn't emerge by force. It comes from shared trust and shared values. This silent precision tells us something powerful. The Indus people were guided by cooperation, not domination. Before we talk about their science, we should notice their discipline. Every brick in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro followed the same proportion, a ratio of 1.24. This wasn't random. It made construction efficient, repair simple, and alignment perfect. Across hundreds of miles, their cities shared the same pattern. It's as if a single architect's mind stretched across 1,000 years, planning every street and wall. The Indus Valley was not just advanced in structure, it was advanced in spirit. Archaeologists find no signs of grand palaces or massive temples. There were no statues of rulers, no monuments glorifying kings. This was a civilization that valued collective progress over individual power. Their art, the seals, the pottery, the small figurines, celebrates life, nature, and daily existence rather than conquest. And then there's the greatest mystery of all, their script. Thousands of inscribed seals and tablets have been discovered, each carrying intricate symbols that likely held meaning for trade, belief, or governance. But despite decades of research, no one has been able to read them. They remain silent, a language without a voice. Before we talk about their silence, we must feel its weight. To stand before a seal that once spoke words of law, prayer, or love, and not understand it, is to face the deepest gap between past and present. The script of the Indus people stands as one of humanity's greatest unsolved puzzles. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Sumerian cuneiform, we have no bilingual texts, no Rosetta Stone to guide us. The script ended before it could evolve into something readable, but its presence, even without interpretation, still tells a story. It tells us these people communicated complex ideas, that they had records, transactions, and perhaps even poetry. The seals often depict animals, bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and mythical creatures, showing both a fascination with the natural world and a symbolic imagination that hints at early belief systems. Before we talk about what they believed, we can see their reverence for the world around them. the motifs of fertility, the worship of nature, the balance between human and divine. These ideas reappear later in South Asian spiritual traditions. Some scholars believe that the seeds of Hinduism, the sacredness of rivers, the use of ritual bathing, the concept of purity, may trace their roots back to the Indus world. The continuity is not direct, but the echoes are undeniable. Their sense of order and cleanliness survived long after their cities fell. In many South Asian towns today, wells still mark the center of communities. The idea that purity begins with water remains deeply embedded in cultural practices, from the Ganges rituals to daily ablutions. The Indus people may have vanished, but their respect for cleanliness became a spiritual inheritance. Before we talk about progress, we should remember what it really means. The Indus Valley was a civilization that thrived without weapons, expanded without conquest, and flourished without hierarchy. There were no vast armies, no evidence of large-scale war, no glorification of power. Instead, there was balance between people, nature, and technology. They achieved what we might call silent progress, one that left behind harmony, not destruction. And yet, their fall reminds us of something humbling. Progress doesn't always guarantee survival. The Indus people built with intelligence and order, but they depended deeply on the stability of their environment. When rivers changed course, when monsoons weakened, when droughts stretched too long, even their brilliance could not save them. Cities that had once thrived began to shrink. Wells dried, trade declined, and slowly, without war or fire, an entire civilization faded. Before we talk about the end, we should see the warning it holds. The Indus Valley teaches us that technology, systems, and comfort mean little when nature turns away. Their fall wasn't caused by greed or invasion alone. It was the slow, unstoppable consequence of imbalance. The same rivers that had given them life eventually swallowed or deserted them. Yet the legacy of their wisdom endured. The methods they used to measure and build would influence future societies. Their emphasis on order and hygiene became a quiet standard for communities that followed. Even though their name disappeared from memory for thousands of years, their achievements were never truly lost. They became part of the unspoken DNA of South Asian civilization. Before we talk about memory, imagine this: for centuries, people lived on the same lands, built new towns above ancient ruins, and never realized they were walking over the bones of one of humanity's first great urban cultures. It wasn't until the 1920s that archaeologists rediscovered Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, revealing a civilization that had lived, thrived, and vanished long before written history began. And in that rediscovery, we were reminded of something essential: that humanity's story is full of forgotten chapters. The Indus Valley stands as one of the oldest and most profound. They proved that progress can exist without aggression, that society can be structured without oppression, and that beauty can thrive in simplicity. Before we talk about the ruins as relics, we should see them as reflections, mirrors showing us who we are and what we might become. The Indus Valley people showed that a civilization's true greatness lies not in its monuments, but in its harmony with nature, with one another, and with itself. They built cities that defied time, yet time still erased their name. The Indus Valley civilization rose with brilliance, a world of balance, innovation, and quiet strength. But even the greatest walls could not stand against the slow breath of nature. Rivers shifted, rains faded, and the hum of life turned to silence. Their story is a haunting reminder of how fragile civilization truly is. We build skyscrapers instead of citadels, machines instead of wells. But are we really so different? Could our own world too one day vanish into dust, leaving behind only traces for others to find? The Indus people remind us that every civilization, no matter how advanced, walks a thin line between memory and oblivion.